Hello everybody, I'm Oliver and this is Chaotic Bibliophile. Today I will tell you about the books that I read for the BookTube Prize round 1, what I thought about them, how I ranked them, and then how those rankings stacked up against the book that actually advanced. First of all, what is the BookTube Prize? Just in case you don't know, this is a prize run by Robert where you get to choose whether you judge fiction or non-fiction, and each round you get a group that has 6 books and then you have to rank them. There's a software that tabulates all the results and generates the 3 that move forward, and then the groups are rejigged. There's an octafinals, a quarterfinals, and semifinals, and a final. So it runs for most of the year, I would say, and every year I signed up to judge at least one round. This year I chose to start with nonfiction. In years past, sometimes you had to choose in advance whether you wanted to judge fiction or nonfiction, and then they would assign you one or the other at random. Now you got to choose which one you wanted to judge, and I chose nonfiction, and I got group F. And let me tell you, I am so glad I did. This is my best BookTube Prize round out of all the rounds of all the years yet. I loved most of the books, and I did have a hard time ranking them. So as I usually do, I am going to review the books in the order that I ranked them, from the lowest to the highest, with the understanding that I was voting for the top 3 to advance. So let's just start because I have loads to say. So the first book I have to tell you about is the one that I ranked number 6, and that is Lin-Manuel Miranda by Daniel Pollack-Pelzner. My first thought when I saw this was, is Lin-Manuel Miranda running for president? What is this? It looks like a hagiography, and that is what it was. It just really reads like a book-long personal statement, except written by somebody else. And it starts with the most tortured story about how Lin-Manuel Miranda was having trouble logging his kid into their Disney Plus account, just like everybody else. He's trying so hard to make Lin-Manuel Miranda relatable. I should stop saying his full name. It has this anecdote about how he was the worst writer. No, not even. He wasn't the best writer out of his class in a school for special gifted children, which doesn't mean he flunked out. Of course not. It just means, I don't know, he wasn't apparently immediately a prodigy at writing specifically. It's just so... Miranda is a very talented individual who's had a very privileged life, which is fine. But I think other than his work, which whether you like it or not, I do think is really important culturally, aesthetically, and it also synthesized a lot of influences of Miranda's life and also seemed to encapsulate a lot of the Obama era aesthetics and millennial aesthetics, and I think generally is a good work musically, even though politically obviously there's loads to say about Encanto and Hamilton and this idea of like making the founding fathers cool, etc. I think those are all very worthy discourses, but this book doesn't meaningfully engage with any of them. It is sold under the guise of like trying to understand creativity, but it's not. It does at some point say, Lin-Manuel asked me to tell the story of his mom because it's really important and people don't ask about it much, which is like, why? I think this should have been a ghost-written autobiography. And I feel a bit bad trashing it because the author is an academic who I hope his work on performance and Shakespeare and contemporary theater is good and solid. And I think that is what led him to Lin-Manuel in the first place. And I'm sure his academic look into Hamilton is really important, and at least I hope so, because he teaches at uni level. But I'm sure that can be true. And also he was just hired to produce these PR puff piece, which, yeah, I mean, if you really love Lin-Manuel, I'm sure you'll enjoy this. His life is just not that interesting, especially not a really sanitized version. But even if, I don't know. I don't know what kind of intrigues his life would have to make it a worthwhile, but he is naturally talented, very hardworking, very intense, and also had every opportunity open to him, and that's good for him and good for culture. And there's Just really nothing else to say about that. This was the only book out of the six that I did not like one bit. Moving on to greener pastures, I am going to tell you about Memorial Days by Geraldine Brooks. I think I have been calling Gwendolyn Brooks for way too long. That's not her name. Her name is Geraldine Brooks, and she's an Australian author, and this is her memoir about her husband dying, unfortunately, quite young. They were both journalists, and so it dives into their meeting, into them developing their careers, alongside how that sometimes originated some friction or moved their collective lives in certain directions. So that was very interesting. And obviously, it also talks about her dealing with his death at a very unexpected time, just what that means for her. And it's clearly her also like working through these feelings and these emotions, and at the same time paying tribute to her husband, whom she really, really loved and whose loss she found devastating, of course. It has a dual structure which alternates chapters between her moving to an island to process this and write this book, and then that is interspersed with the story of their marriage from its early days to the day that he passed away. It has a lot of compelling writing about grief and about journalism and their different journalistic temperaments. I thought that was the bit that I actually liked the most. But there are lots of times where she says, "Oh, my husband would have said to cut this bit or to do this editorializing." And most of the times that actually agreed. Yeah, I just think generally it's a good memoir. I just thought it's not mind blowing, which feels a bit mean to say because obviously this is a very personal book and it's her experience and she wants to write about it however she wants. However, you compare it to the sort of high benchmark for this, which is The Year of Magical Thinking, which she does reference, and her husband actually did not like, but she does give Didion her due. She says the way she writes about grief is very accurate. Not just that, if you think about stuff like In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, these are books that deal with these sorts of hyper personal pains and griefs, but they do so in a way that feels so elevated. And though I think this memoir was really good and I'm really glad I read it, I just don't think it was up to that level compared to other works that I read in this group. I still recommend it if you're interested in the topic though. It's also not very long, so I think you would enjoy it. All right, the next book really tested me in terms of what I was going to move forward or not, because I wish I could have also moved forward How to End a Story by Helen Garner. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry because I did love this. First of all, it starts with a brilliant foreword by essayist Leslie Jameson, who talks about Gardner's honesty and vulnerability and what makes the journals great. These are her diaries from, let me see, 1978 to 1998. So it spans 2 decades of just an incredibly interesting life. At the same time, it's a life that was quite nomadic in some ways, but also it's a life that comes with being a professional writer that is not a celebrity writer. That's not someone who just lives off all royalties and movie deals, and it's just so interesting. I think very few books deal with the realities of being a somewhat established working writer who's up for some awards, who is in some sort of scene, but also not this like super social glamorous person. Obviously, this was also before social media. So fascinating from that point of view. It's immediately compelling. The voice is quite grumpy at times, but also it's just disarming. It has disarming honesty, and her insightful mind is also a delight to read. Her observations, what she worries about, when she talks about her insecurities, a lot of them are very relatable. I also love her little snippets of conversation that she hears. It's definitely something that I do mentally as well, just noticing what people talk about. I guess that's also her writerly side. She also talks about writing loads, both her own and other people's, and I think those are my favorite bits. They are really helpful. You could definitely extract only her writerly concerns and put them in their own book and package it as Helen Gardner on writing, which is really interesting because I think most people highlight her affairs, her the disintegration of her first marriage, which no, it was not her first. I think it was her second. And those bits are really interesting. Her friendships, her relationships are all a very fascinating beating heart of the book. But I personally liked the small, the internal, the sort of ruminating bits more, which doesn't say anything about the book. Rather, it says something about myself as a person and what I'm interested in reading. Overall, it's just brilliant. The only reason I didn't advance it is because I just really thought the other books were so outstanding in their scope and the sort of efforts that they went through, and the results was so good that it was just a really, really hard choice. Alas, I had to make it. But if you like reading diaries, if you like reading live writing, if you like reading about writing, this is sort of the opposite because it's like such a huge book as the like Deborah Levy um living autobiography series, but I feel like it's sort of similar in some ways in terms of spirit, and it might hit the same way. Check this out. It is so good, and I am a bit gutted that I didn't put it higher, but you just will understand when I tell you about the other books. Number 3, and the first book I advanced, was Jane Austen's Bookshelf by Rebecca Romney. I think this is almost mispackaged. I understand why they want to capitalize on the Jane Austen of it all, especially because it's the anniversary and all of that, but it actually almost minimizes what this book does. This is just a superb blend of memoir, history, with a tad of literary criticism, and a brilliant piece of feminist scholarship. So basically, Rebecca Romney, who has been a lifelong Jane Austen fan, embarks on the journey of reading authors that she thinks Austen read, be that because they are mentioned in her letters or in her novels. So there is a central Jane Austen element to this, but it's not so much about understanding Jane Austen and her writing, although there is some of that. And certainly that's how the project sort of originates. But the further Romney goes, the more she gets into understanding why these books fell out of critical favor, how they were received at the time, what the texts say, and she does really eloquent criticism of the texts themselves, and then what it's like reading them as a modern, especially woman, reader. And also, it dives into her life as a rare book collector and seller. At the time of writing, she's been in the rare book trade and the antique book trade for a long time. And as someone who doesn't know anything about it, I found those bits also exceptionally interesting. And the fact that she took time to explain, how some descriptors work, how auctions work. It was very fascinating. And I think what was most charming and surprising in a good way was that none of the sections or elements of this book felt disparate. It all cohered into just one of the best books about literature for the general public, or not even just generally, that I've ever read. I am so impressed. I love the structure as well. 2 chapters are dedicated to the author, to an author in question. In one of them, she sort of explains the context and goes into the text, and then the next one, she talks about her experience getting the book, or maybe it's the other way around, but basically it's loosely separated into the text itself and the context of production, and then the critical reception, her own journey into acquiring it, and her thoughts on the text. It also goes into the lives of these authors, which obviously is really important to the context of production of the text. The conclusion, spoiler alert, is that there were loads of other reasons why some of these books fell out of favor, and it doesn't necessarily reflect anything about the books themselves. And also, it talks a lot about how the Jane Austen narrative worked so well, because it's like she was the only one. She was the brilliant one. She was the only woman. We already have a woman in the canon, and that's her. All sorts of things that I sort of knew, but seeing them written in such a way, and also in the context of reassessing all these authors and searching for these books and talking about the stories and the texts. Oh my god, there is so much. Even explaining it feels like a lot, but then trust me, everything is extremely well executed. Rebecca Romney is a very confident, easygoing author. I really loved her writing. I will say though, and this is the only reason I considered advancing How to End a Story instead of this book. The book is at times very poorly edited. There are some repetitions within adjoining paragraphs. There's some grammar stuff where I question the choice, but I don't think it's the author. I think these are like subtle missteps that a good editor would have caught. However, just because of the scope of the book and the way it's executed, I had to advance it and I love it. Even if you are not a massive Jane Austen fan, if you're interested in classics, I think you'll enjoy this book very much. As you may have noticed, I actually do not have a physical copy of that book, but I am planning on getting a physical copy because I definitely want to revisit it and I want to highlight, and also I want to just have more time to study how she did it, because it really is a high benchmark for writing literary criticism that blends history and memoir for the general public, which sounds like a very specific thing, but I actually think it's the future of literary criticism, and it's something that I am fascinated by and really interested in. So yeah. Next book, number 2, we're almost there. It's América by Grandin. This is blurbed by Naomi Klein. It says, dazzling, sweeping, mind-altering, world-changing. This is a once-in-a-generation contribution. And I agree. I mean, it was just so good. Don't get me wrong, it was enraging, but it's also so good. The subtitle for this is A New History of the New World. And what that means, it's basically constructing the history of the Americas as one continent, and how these histories that have been generally taught as separate, except in certain specific points, are actually intertwined and have been intertwined from colonization. The Spanish crown invested so much time and effort and money into developing all these sort of religious justifications for colonization. It's just enraging, really. I'm not surprised by it, but it still hit that spot. I also really enjoyed that this intro begins with a discussion of the term America and how the US sort of appropriated it, although a lot of it, especially the Latin American colony side, I learned in school. It was really great to learn even more in depth, and also again in relation to the processes that were happening in the US and how things played out alongside, and how the independent movements were so aligned at one point and then they diverged. The US was very expansionist in its project, and they didn't want to, for example, cooperate with Simon Bolivar, who envisioned a much more united Latin America and America more generally. The book focuses a lot on the procedural politics of it all, on the political, legal, and moral slash religious justifications for different processes, moves, and wars. The book spans from colonization to, I would say, almost current day politics. Obviously, the book had to stop at some point, but the epilogue does a good job at summarizing where we're at now. It packs a lot in to what looks like a huge book, and in a way it is, but I would say, the print is not that small, and obviously it has tons and tons of notes. So it's actually quite a succinct book for what it is, and the fact that it manages to synthesize everything into a coherent narrative. And also, more than synthesize, I feel like it weaves together so many narratives that had been told over and over, but separately, into a tapestry that reveals the history of this continent. Overall, a masterpiece of history book, that one that takes so many primary sources and historical narratives, and as I said, weaves them together with precision and expertise. I could not advance this book, even if at sometimes I was a bit like, oh, enough with the international politics. I mean, there's a reason I didn't become a lawyer slash diplomat. Fantastic book. I think one that should be mandatory reading. I also loved that the epilogue was not all doom and gloom. Obviously, it was realistic about the state of the world, but also it tried to highlight, I think, the lessons in history that we can take to reattempt more socialist leaning projects and more community led projects. And I think that is always a worthwhile point to make, even if it's not the focus of the book. And the focus is the history, and you should read it, because whether you know little or loads, I promise there is something in there for you. And then the final book, the one that I ranked first, is Daughters of the Bamboo Grove by Barbara Demick. This is the story of twin sisters that were separated, not quite at birth, but quite young. They were born in China, and one of them was adopted by a white American family, and the other stayed back in China with family. The book not only follows this story, but this is a starting point to talk about the baby trafficking, often legal baby trafficking practice and pipeline from China to the Western world, especially the US, because that's the focus of Demick's main story, but this happened all over the world. So, of course, this is a naturally shocking and fascinating story. And Barbara Demick carries it to its very last conclusion, which is the twins reuniting and the not fallout, because that implies negativity, but like all the complicated aftermath of that. I honestly do not have loads to say about this book. It's got great writing, which blends all the elements of this book seamlessly, which means the historical, political dimensions with the journalistic and the personal involvement. Barbara Demick is very candid and examines her own involvement as a journalist and as a human in this story. It interrogates her own motives and also the ethics of what she's doing, and I think the way she carries it out is admirable, and she writes about it in a very sympathizing way. She doesn't demonize individuals. She talks about structures of power. I honestly think this is a perfect journalism book. I got it from the library, and I think I made the right call, but I would actually reread it. So if I find a secondhand copy, I might get it. It's just really, really good. It's also so readable. I started it, and then there was one evening or afternoon, I think, I was like, I need to finish this book. It's so good. I can't stand not knowing. Informative, harrowing, but optimistic in its pursuit, in people's pursuits of truths and their resilience. 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5, I guess. Very, very good book. That's Barbara Demick's Daughters of the Bamboo Grove. 100% recommend, and is the one that I ranked the highest. So how did my rankings compare to the books that actually moved forward? Well, they don't reveal the rankings of the books that moved forward, but I am so pleased to confirm that all three books that I wanted to advanced as well, which I don't think has ever happened. I'm actually almost always disappointed, or at least enraged for one book, which is not the exception this year. It's just with a different group. The group that did not move forward, 38 Londres Street by Philippe Sands, committed a crime. That book is so good. It was one of my top books of, I think I read it in 2024 because I had an advanced copy, but it came out last year, I think. It's so good. It's about Pinochet's arrest in London and the fight to bring justice. And it's also about how a Nazi guy came here and was a torturer for Pinochet's dictatorship. It's again one of those narratives. I think I talked about this. I'm going to link the video where I reviewed it. But essentially, it's one of the best books I've ever read. Outstanding nonfiction. And I am devastated that it didn't move forward. So please check it out. Please check it out. Do yourself a favor. I don't know if it's out in paperback already, but it will be soon. If not, I'm sure. And that's all. I am so pleased that my picks advanced. But unfortunately, I am not going to continue judging this year just because, as you know, I'm really trying to read my own books, especially being in Santiago at the moment, and my library in London having just logged me out of my account because I think it's expired because I have a friend who's in London who also had an account at that library system, and she's also been logged out. I think it's because it's expired because we haven't asked for physical books from that library, which is fair. I will be renewing it when I'm back. Well, I'm not going to be living in that area at first. We'll see, we'll see. In any case, what I meant to say is it's hard to find the books here. I also don't want to buy new books this year because I really, really want to read the books I own. And even if I could access all of them, that would still be me reading new books that I don't own at the moment. So I think this is it for me this year. However, I am looking forward to joining next year. I will be living in London if all works out well, and as it's supposed to. So then I can join and I can check the books out of the library. I also won't have my entire library to choose from at the time. I am tired and I need to go make lunch. So thank you for watching. Please let me know your thoughts about the BookTube Prize, about this round, about my reviews, about my rankings. Do you plan to read any of these books? Have you read them? What are your thoughts? If you judged a different round or the same round, please let me know in the comments. I do have some videos on my list to check out, but in case I miss anyone, please let me know. And if not, just send me a little cloud. I don't know why, but today I'm thinking clouds, not in like a sad way, just in like a, cute, fluffy way. That's all. See you next time.